While governments around the world are printing money and spending trillions of dollars of borrowed money to shore up their capital markets and economies due to the effects of the global pandemic, there is a menacing plague that no one's talking about. This plague does not involve a virus, but rather it involves a much deeper illness, an illness that will affect every living soul on the planet. And the most amazing thing about it is that no one's talking about it. Ever since the last economic meltdown of 2008-2009, the European Union, under the European Central Bank or ECB, has been pursuing a reckless policy of endless quantitative easing to prop up the failing governments in mostly the southern European countries called the pigs, namely Portugal, Spain, Italy, Ireland, and Greece. These countries cannot generate enough economic growth to cover their operating costs and service their debt. As a result, they must have constant access to the capital markets and bailouts to continue to operate with the crushing debt loads that they currently carry. As a result, they need the intervention of the ECB in the form of quantitative easing in order to survive. By copying what the US had done during the financial crisis of 2008-2009, the ECB prints money from thin air and buys government bonds of the profligate countries in order to keep their interest rates artificially low. Italy, for example, currently has outstanding debt of over 150% of its total GDP. It currently borrows 10-year money at 1%, utilizing the charade that the ECB is perpetuating. The reason they do this is clear. If Italy, Greece, or Spain, or any of the pigs, were subject to real market rates that reflect the true credit risk of their ability to pay, they would become insolvent in a matter of weeks. Italy, for example, would be paying over 10% and clearly couldn't survive. This scheme is analogous to a Ponzi scheme, but it has become generally accepted as standard procedure for the EU as the only way these irresponsible countries can continue to operate, and it's the only way for Germany to keep the EU together. And as we have learned, Germany must keep the EU together to continue to have access to the euro as its domestic currency. This keeps its currency much lower than the old Deutschmark, making its manufactured goods cheaper and thus ensuring Germany's vast industrial complex will continue to remain dominant. As incredible as this state of affairs is to anyone that truly understands it, the situation just got worse. And once I explain it to you, you will not only not believe it, but you will wonder why no one is talking about it. At the end of July 2020, during the ongoing global pandemic, the European Union, in a desperate move, decided to go even deeper into the morass of its ongoing Ponzi scheme. An idea that was being pushed by French President Emmanuel Macron was finally adopted by the EU's financial father figure, i.e. Germany, In an unprecedented step, which it resisted for many years, it agreed to push the idea of issuing common debt to finance a bailout of the pigs due to the pandemic. Angela Merkel, in a final step of desperation in her long career as, quote, King of Europe, unquote, finally decided to back the scheme whereby all 27 countries of the EU would be on the hook for a bailout for the southern European nations. This is the step that Merkel and the German decision-makers had resisted for years. But Macron apparently convinced Merkel that such a step was necessary for the very survival of the EU. The fact that Merkel was convinced that it is necessary to do this should terrify everyone, because it shows how fragile the EU is in its current form and how close to financial collapse it currently is. The thing that was the deciding factor was the realization that this crisis threatened the very existence of the EU to an even greater extent than the last financial crisis 12 years ago. 12 years ago, the threat of the Greek debt crisis and resulting financial contagion resulted in a massive sell-off in the financial markets and extreme volatility in the stock market. This time around, even though the risk is much, much greater, no one's even talking about it. Now, not all of the so-called rich nations were on board with this new idea. One standout was Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte, spelled R-U-T-T-E. Rutte, who has served as Prime Minister since 2010, has historically been opposed to loans without strings attached, like fiscal reforms, or even worse, grants to the southern European countries. Look at what he said before the historic negotiations and you can see his view on the issues.
No, for us it is, we don't believe in this grants-based system. And what we have said is that, first of all, crucial is to maintain the rebates at a sufficient level. The rebates are now there. But we still need to negotiate what is a sufficient level. Secondly, we need reforms, so that if the South is needing help from other countries in terms to cope with the crisis, I understand that, because there is limited scope to deal with that financially themselves, then I think it is only reasonable for us to ask for a clear commitment to reforms. And if then loans have to be converted to a certain extent into grants, then the reforms are even more crucial and the absolute guarantee that they have taken place.
Clearly, he wanted to tie any loans or grants to reforms and austerity measures. Ultimately, despite severe misgivings by the EU's strongest economies, such as the Netherlands, Sweden, Denmark, and Austria, the 27-member group passed a truly historic 750 billion euro or $858 billion rescue plan to rescue the bloc's largely southern economies from the ongoing assault of the pandemic. What made the agreement historic, and some would say tragic, is that all 27 countries agreed to put up their credit to issue bonds that would be distributed to the southern European countries in the form of 360 billion euros in loans and 390 billion euros in grants. These grants would not have to be paid back. This scheme, while benefiting the pigs and allowing them to continue to spend unabated, it amounted to a transfer of wealth from the rich northern European countries to the poorer, less productive southern countries, largely without any reform requirements or strings attached to the bailouts. This was a clear departure from past practice, where money was given to these countries for bailouts that were, number one, loans, and number two, had austerity measures attached to them as requirements. Here, the loans and grants have no conditions and thus allow countries like Italy to continue to spend without racking up enormous amounts of debt on top of their current 150% of GDP number. The fact that the 27 member countries agreed to such a plan, with notably Germany and the Netherlands agreeing, shows to everyone who's paying attention just how desperate the situation in Europe has become. Recent estimates project that the Eurozone's economy will contract over 9% this year alone. Germany has proven that it will do literally almost anything to keep the charade of the EU together. It's obvious that there are major cultural, ethnic, productivity, and work ethic differences among the various countries in the EU. Now, with this agreement in place, the bloc is not only tied together as a trading bloc, as it was originally envisioned, but their economies and in fact their balance sheets are inextricably connected in a Faustian bargain which, once made, cannot be undone. Will this act go down in history as a truly Hamiltonian moment, as was imagined by the adoring mainstream media, or a pact with the devil that the rich nations of the EU will grow to regret? The basic question is, how long will taxpayers in the wealthy northern countries allow their elite politicians to transfer their wealth to their southern neighbors in a desperate effort to keep the EU together? Only time will tell, and as Warren Buffett so aptly put it, it's only when the tide goes out that you get to see who's swimming naked.